Welcome to Massey Dialogues. My name is Nathalie de Rosiers and I'm the principal of Massey College. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here today for a discussion on humans in the house. And we'll discuss in a few minutes what it's all about. I want first to recognize that Massey College is built on indigenous land, the lands of the Yonwanda, the Seneca, and it is the treaty land of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward this land and the great privilege that we have to be here. So this is the title of this dialogue, Humans of the House, as though there may be some inhumans in the house as well. And it's stories about civic engagement. This is a great partnership, I think, that we want to support the work of Samara in trying to bring democracy alive and reflect more broadly to issues of democracy. I had the occasion to listen to the podcast today. It's great. It's really fun. So, and to discuss the idea of the podcast, what it means to do, and in a way launch it to the greater community. I have three speakers today. Very delighted to have them. First, the executive director, and she's also a senior fellow at Massey College, Sabreena Delhon. She's been engaged in doing impressive research for many years. She's appeared as an expert before parliamentary committees on mostly political participation. She's provided commentaries in different news media. She is the host of Humans of the House, and she's also had several senior leadership roles at the Law Society of Ontario. She was at Massey College as well as the Simon Fraser University Maurice J. Walk Centre for Dialogue Fellow a few years back. So welcome back, Sabreena. It's always fun to have you. And she's accompanied today by Hannah Song, who's the co-founder of Media Girlfriends. Her previous work include producing award-winning podcasts for the Globe and Mail and the Globe Content Studio, including Color Code, a podcast about race in Canada, and Stress Test, a podcast about personal finance. At the eve of filing your taxes, everybody probably is listening to this.
Can't talk about that tonight, no.
Award-winning podcast at TVO and at the Walrus Lab. She was the Asper Fellow at the University of Western Ontario Faculty of Information and Media Studies in 2020, and where she led a postgraduate journalism class in narrative podcasting, which is quite interesting to do. She began her career at Much Music. She was the host of shows including Much News and the live red carpet at Much Music Video Awards. So welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you.
And finally, it's Kim Kierans. Kim Kierans is a senior fellow at Massey College, and she's also a senior resident here. She has been engaged in doing some podcasting with the junior fellows at Massey College, and long career in journalism. She had more than 20 years in news, current affairs at CBC Radio. She also has been really involved at University of King College in Halifax, where she is the English professor at King's College. So she is the vice chair of the Federal Independent Advisory Board on Eligibility for Journalism Tax Measure, and she sat for many years on the executive of the Missioner Awards Foundation. I know that she just received a special award, a recognition for all her work at King's. Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
So now let's start a little bit on why. Sabreena, why this show is about the human side of politics. Why is it important to show the human side of politics?
Yeah, well, I think our starting point was acknowledging that political conversations today can be really difficult and challenging. They can be angry, they can be intimidating, and it's common for us to see politicians be dehumanized. And so our starting point with this project was for us to try to counter that, and we wanted to do that with something that was substantive, authentic, and creative. And so we felt that looking at the actual experience of the person in politics was a really good way for us to get into that space and also just break down what it's like to really have that job. Because most people don't really know the day-to-day, and we really should. And so we felt that that was an important gap and kind of counter to provide. And we also felt like a podcast is a really great medium for this, because we listen to podcasts when we're just going about our life, when we're commuting, when we're making dinner, and when you're in that kind of context, you are engaging in a different way. It's a deeper form of engagement. And when you put human stories into that kind of space, when you're listening to people who are kind of relatable and exceptional at the same time, which we feel like the guests on Humans of the House are, it starts to give you a way to guide your audience into complicated and sensitive conversations about the health of our democracy without it feeling aggressive or top down or scary. And the other reason why we really leaned into the human side on this was to counter the notion that good and hardworking people are not in politics. And that good, and you know that, and good and hardworking people should steer clear. And that's not what we want. The Samara Centre for Democracy, we want to inspire people to be civically engaged. There's lots of ways to do that. Running for office is one of them. And so we were really glad that we could turn to former MPs and hear what they had to say about this. And one of the reasons why they were so forthcoming, it was kind of incredible, it's like they were waiting to be treated as human beings in these conversations, because we just asked them some human questions and then it all poured out. A key factor here is that they're not in the job anymore. And so in a lot of different workspaces, you use exit interviews when someone's leaving the job to understand what would it have taken for them to stay, what would have made things more productive, what would have made the organization better. And so they've got a lot to share with us, and the human package really makes a big difference.
Well, so that's the human side. Now, it is true that people are a little bit skeptical when they talk about politics, and there's a lot of distrust, distaste, even about politicians. Hannah, what do you say when somebody says, hey, why should I listen again to a politician's perspective? I hear them all the time, you know.
I mean, I think that, well, skepticism is a natural state of being for a journalist for many of us, but I think that critical thought is really important, obviously, and I think that people who grow up in our digital era have it by necessity, because it's a way to survive with all of the information that's out there. That being said, you know, we went into this project really knowing what we wanted to do, which was to rehumanize, as Sabreena was saying, you know, these people who have these jobs, and these are jobs that need to be done. Who are they? So if we're going to understand politics, which can seem very intimidating and complicated, you know, we felt like the first place to start was to understand the people who do the job. Why do they do it? How did they get into it? What motivated them? They come from actually all different walks of life, you know? And so we felt that podcasting, as Sabreena already mentioned, was a really great way to connect with people. But also at Media Girlfriends, we are so into podcasts because we feel that they are specifically a format that gives a lot of time and space for context. So it was really good. It was a good marriage of what the project is trying to do, and then what, you know, our chosen medium is, in terms of highlighting stories as a way of connecting regular average people with the politicians that they either kind of might be vilifying or they might see as very distant from them or unrelatable, you know. We really felt like, sure, you know, people
so,
say that,
there is the element of authenticity that comes when people talk about why they became a politician.
Yeah, and authenticity is such a big part of what podcasting is all about as well, because there's so much richness of information in your voice, you know. So when you spend 30, 40 upwards minutes with someone's voice, you can really get to know who they are, and that's what we were hoping to do, was just kind of bring that illumination to, you know, who are you? Why do you do this? And what do we need to know? How can we be more involved in our democracy by understanding you better?
So Kim, does the podcast medium work here? I mean, it's important for journalists to be in multiple media. How do you see this? I mean, you've done podcasts a lot now, so what's the advantage here?
Oh, it's wonderful because what it does is it takes you into a world that we don't normally have access to as human, as people who are just going about our everyday lives. So it's wonderful to be taken into the worlds and to hear, again, the voices. Radio, I think, is the most visual medium of all audio, in that it's a theater of the mind. It's so humanizing. It's a place for ideas. It's a place for stories, and I think this podcast series does it exceptionally well. It really, I couldn't turn it off. And that's, I think, because my attention span is limited, and it was really engaging. I went along those journeys and with those stories, and it's beautifully organized as well in the different sections.
So it looks like, okay, it's fun to listen to,
Yes.
it's informative, it brings out a little bit a sense for us of wanting to hear politicians on a different frame that they're usually presented. But Sabreena, you've called the conversation an important indicator for the health of our democracy. How does it tell us about the health of our democracy?
Well, I should start by saying that Humans of the House is part of the Samara Centre's longstanding initiative, the MP Exit Interview Project. So we've been conducting exit interviews with former MPs since 2008, and we've done over 150 so far, and a dozen of our most recent are featured on the show. And so before this study began, there was no systematic way to get this information. And when people are leaving a job, they have so much to
say.
Tell you. And we really want to harness that and capture it, and also be responsive to what we're hearing as well, because the health of Parliament relates to the health of our democracy, and what happens to our representative, their experience on the job affects all of us, the people they represent. And so what I heard in terms of the health of our democracy from these conversations was a lot of honesty and hope. And I have to confess, I was pretty surprised by that. I didn't think there was going to be as much authenticity as there was in these conversations. I was also skeptical. But they are sharing their stories with us because they want people to understand the challenges that they faced in the role, raise awareness about those challenges, and have people be better equipped should they decide to enter the space as well. There's a real commitment to increasing and supporting participation and representation in our democracy. And this isn't just about people talking about what's bad and needs fixing in our politics. There is plenty of that, but they're also reflecting on what was good and could be even better. And when we sat down with Lisa Raitt, she talked to us about how being an MP was one of the best jobs she'd ever had, and she talks about how the equal pay meant equal power, and that made such a big difference for her. And she also talks to us about the friends and connections she made with colleagues in other parties, which we really don't hear enough of, right? And that was actually quite common. They would, in our interviews, just mention like, oh, and you'll talk to Selena, and oh, what about Peter? And it was kind of a reminder, oh, you're at work, these are just your work colleagues, these are people you used to work with, like it's an important job, it's a serious job, but you're all people, you work together, and you have warmth in your connections with each other. But Lisa Raitt also talked to us about the major sacrifices that she made to serve her constituents, the toll the job took on her in terms of her mental health and wellness and her family. And then we also hear from Catherine McKenna, who faced extreme instances of harassment online and offline. And she talks about the exceptionalism of Parliament is ridiculous, and that this is a work environment that needs to catch up to current standards of professionalism, having codes of conduct, HR policies that keep MPs safe, and that they are functioning
productive and
in a sustainable environment so they can do good work. And it's important for us to be responsive to what we hear from these conversations. The individuals and their stories are so compelling, but broadly their recommendations are incredibly bland and easy to action on, like more robust onboarding supports, more training to hire and manage your staff. This is basic stuff that any business would be doing, a lot of other sectors and organizations would be doing. Why is this so different here? And if we're not responsive to this information, then the leaders that we need are going to leave, or they're going to stop stepping forward altogether. And so this does kind of give us a bit of a snapshot of this moment in democracy in Canada right now, and also what can come next for it.
And so you've done lots of interviews in your media savvy, and so does that present to interview politicians in a kind of close, almost intimate way? Does that present some ethical challenges? Like, do politicians kind of hold the mic for longer than anyone else, wanting to control the conversation? Well, did that raise some issues for you in terms of the ethics of your profession?
You know, I don't really know what it was, but they all definitely came to the mic as just themselves. I think they were ready to do that with us. And I think partially it was because when we got together, our collaborative team, we spent a lot of time talking about what our mission was. You know, what is our why? Why are we trying to grab the time of these former MPs, and what is it that we want to do with them together in that time? They're all very busy people, but I can tell you that nobody was rushing off the line at the end.
I
as Sabreena said, it was like they were waiting to. Yeah, and many of them mentioned like that it was refreshing, or that they had never told these stories before, or so you might be surprised that people who are in front of a mic so frequently would say, I've never talked about this before. And some of our questions were quite basic, like how did it feel when, or what was it like for you when you arrived, or
who helped you?
Yeah, and all those things get skipped when you're sparring in the media, and when you need to grab your golden little soundbite. And when we were focusing on them, and the stories that brought them there, and then afterwards, like the larger context. It was, but when you bring up the ethical considerations, of course, we talked about that a lot as well. So, we had to do a lot of background research and understanding. Thank goodness it was a amalgam of our teams, right? Because there are dedicated research folks at Samara. We had fact checking. We had a lot of time, which really, really helps when you're not up against an unreasonable deadline. And we knew when to call for comment. We knew when to check against other sources, and we just did all of that. But nobody we found was trying to torque the story or pull the wool over our eyes, like maybe some people might expect in the beginning. It was not like that. In fact, so many of the MPs kind of railed against the partisanship that was a part of their experience, and now that they were freed of party politics, they could just talk about their experiences and what they were like.
So it may have been different to talk to them before they left, or it might have been much harder to open up. So, Kim, do you feel that teaching journalism now, in the context of the polarization of politics, in the context of the diminishment maybe of the trust that we have in our institution, is it harder, or how do we teach journalism when the institutions around it seem to be crumbling a bit?
I think it's way different teaching journalism nowadays. The journalism that I knew 40 years ago is deeply being criticized, being held to question. The whole idea of the objectivity, voice from heaven, it just doesn't wash anymore. And I think that young people that are interested in journalism, and there seems to be a real passion among them to tell longer form stories, so stories like you're telling. To try and explain the news. So instead of the conflict model, there's a real move towards solutions journalism, where people are saying, okay, there are problems, there are systemic problems in our society. Who's doing something about it? And how is it working for them? Could we bring it to our community, to our country, to our and do something with it? And so there's a real, whether it's through the lens of environment, through the lens of trauma-informed journalism, or through the lens of peace journalism, there is a real desire to do that.
And does this project fit into this, it's understanding, the solution of making sure that people that go into politics feel supported, since the job has to be done by someone, or I don't know, did you get that from the podcast? Who's going to listen to it? Will they change their view? The hope is that they'll change their view about democracy?
I think that every student in Canada ought to listen to this. And whether you're in elementary school, junior high, high school, and political science classes, I think that this is a valuable tool to helping our understanding, because we don't have the civics classes that we used to have. People don't understand. I have people coming into graduate programs in journalism that don't understand what our democracy is, the pillars, any of that. So this is a really valuable teaching tool.
Well, just to jump
yes,
on that.
Yes, for sure.
We
please do that.
We
it's
saw
more
the
fun
potential.
When
so we worked with the Social Studies Educators Network of Canada to make curriculum-connected resources based on the show. So teachers will be using that in classrooms across the country in the fall. And then we're also doing outreach to professors, because we'd love to see this on course outlines, and for it to be relevant and used beyond the political science department. It's not just that discipline that needs a show. It can be in journalism courses, it can be in sociology courses, Canadian studies. Like there's just lots of different directions it can go. And for it to be something that resonated from an education perspective, but was also entertaining and engaging at the same time, was something that we worked really hard to secure.
In the beginning of the first podcast, you go on the street and you ask people, would you run? It's such a fun part of it, before we get to meet the MPs. And you have a mix of responses, Some say, no, I'm not smart enough, or I don't know enough. And then you have something, well, maybe I would, or something. I didn't listen to the whole story, but are you going to the people at times more often, or is the idea that after listening to this series, they would all at least think they could?
Maybe that's the next season.
I love that. I love the talk of the next season. It's interesting, Nathalie, that you said it was a mix of responses, because I found it to be a resounding no, I would never run. We, Elena, producer here, and we were out on the street just in front of Massey College here on Bloor Street, and there were a lot of young people, student types, and 9 out of 10 of them, we only stopped 10 people. It took us about an hour. It was a beautiful day, and it was a nice time to have these conversations with people. 9 said, "No, I would not run." But the answers as to why were surprising, because they all said, you have to be so smart, you have to be so prepared, so well researched. I'm not smart enough. There was one student who was a poli-sci student, and she said, and then her friends started laughing. They were both laughing, because if not you, then who, right? But I was surprised that the folks that we chatted with simultaneously held politicians in high regard, right? And you need to be so well read. Then also, a lot of words like
they're fake. They're not telling the truth. They don't fulfill their promises. They tell us what we want to hear, but this sort of sense of untruth about this. So I wanted to know, and I'm going to open it up to questions both from the virtual audience, but also for our audience. But before we go, the project is for parliamentarians, for people in the House in federal politics.
Correct.
And because I was in provincial politics, I was wondering, I'm listening to it to see whether there was marked differences, and my sense is no. Like the stories, you would probably be able to reproduce similar insights, I think, from politicians and politicians of different stripes, that are. So you paid a lot of attention to ensure that all parties are represented and so on. So how did you select your 12?
Well, it wasn't easy by any means, and but we did work very hard to get as much variation and diversity as possible in terms of party, geography and also lived experience as well, so that it was a reflection as much as possible of Canada, but also enabled us to have discussions about deficiencies and representation as well. But it definitely was not easy, and that's just a dozen of the interviews we're doing for this wave. We've done about 30 in total, and there's more to come and further analysis to share in reports as well.
So you think that the 30 will go into almost a published report, and this fabulous podcast kind of is the way in which we engage with a dry report in a way, by getting a little bit more. So why don't I ask you whether you have any questions on what the format, the objective, the second season. What should we want to know about people in politics? It was interesting to me, if nobody's coming, I have way more questions. So it was interesting to me to speak about money, about the role of money in politics, the fear of having to ask for money, the price ticket to be in politics. Did that come up again? Is that something that you reflect a little bit in terms of not only the toll, but the financial toll that it may impose on some of them? Did that come up?
Like the cost to get into politics, the cost of a campaign, things like that.
And also the cost of personal costs in terms of savings or
we get into that a little bit. It's a 6-part series, and in the first episode we hear about how people got onto the path to politics and how savvy were they about what it would take and what it would cost. We get more into the personal finance part of it tomorrow when our last episode comes out, and we hear reflections on what it's like when it's over, and what do you do after this job, and how do you find a job. And it is really kind of underknown in the conversation that once you've pursued a life in politics, it does close a lot of doors for you in terms of employment opportunities. And so we hear some really just frank and open conversations about what it was like to navigate that, and also find a new sense of self and identity as well, not just with your profession, but in terms of who and what you are and how you relate to your community when you're no longer their representative, and that can happen for a variety of reasons.
Sometimes the people
this is not your decision always
tell you that you're going to have to change jobs.
I have a question as well about it's a great educational tool, and in it there are certain reforms that were suggested by the former MPs. How is it possible to actually take the ideas of these reforms, sort of the HR and all this kind of thing, and actually transform it into action? I mean, is there sort of, who does that next, apart from setting it out on the plate?
So looking ahead, once we've done more interviews, we'll compile these recommendations and we will share them accordingly with parties, with Parliament, and make sure that people are aware of the research we have done. We also make our interview data available to other researchers who share our values and the spirit of the project as well. And we got to put a little bit of what we know into practice as a witness for the Procedures and House Affairs Committee last fall when they were talking about whether to continue with hybrid parliament or not. And we talked about the equity and inclusion aspects and what we have heard from our exit interviews there as well. So there's a few different mediums, but we're really pleased that this is the show has been received so well in terms of just mainstream engagement, because that makes it relevant. It's one thing to be able to be invited into select spaces and share what you've learned, but for it to be coming from other people, that is going to carry much more weight. It matters when we say it, when Media Girlfriend says it, but for just all podcast listeners, general podcast listeners, to be like, yeah, hey, how come that's not like this? Like, make it better. That goes a long way.
Thanks.
Well, I was intrigued a little bit as well about this is a longitudinal study in a way. I mean, Samara had done these interviews, exit interviews, I think for the last two parliaments or something. So is it getting better or is it getting worse? Are you in a position to assess whether indeed there's a transformation of our political scene or not?
Yeah. Well, we're now ready to do this longitudinal analysis, and it's underway right now, and our research manager, Beatrice Wayne, is here and leading that work. And it is interesting to kind of just with broad strokes and have, early analysis show us the need for more support at the beginning rings true for everybody. But a big change is the relevance of social media and online toxicity and navigating that. So we'll have more to share in terms of that analysis later in the year. But looking at the trends and patterns is really fascinating.
If somebody,
Hi. So my question is, I guess, for Kim, but I think the follow-up question I hope you can all maybe speak to. So I was wondering what changes you've sort of observed in political reporting over your 40 years of journalism, and how you see this podcast as fitting into that larger history.
Wow, that's a great question, Abby. Thank you. I think that political reporting tends to be adversarial, and I don't think that has changed much. Maybe it's got a little fiercer. I mean, Nathalie would know mostly because she's been on the floor of it. But and I think, though, that that people are getting a little bit tired of that, and I really am in favor of us reframing how we do our coverage of politics, because it's really sad that when journalists and politicians are down on the trust scale, probably below lawyers, that we need to do something about that. And the mis and disinformation has such a huge impact, because it really does affect the quality of what we believe. Something that's tweeted that's wrong gets distributed 30 times more than something that's correct. So we're constantly fighting that as journalists, but there are some good things happening. There is the Trust Project, in which media outlets are trying to be transparent about what they do, how they do, and to tell that to their readers, their viewers, their listeners. They're trying to put they're putting their codes of ethics online. They're trying to say what we're doing is correct, and the counter narrative that we are, in effect, liars, is a lie, in a sense. So, but it's hard, and it's one of those battles that the data is so conflicting as to how well it's working.
I was reflecting a little bit on this, the idea of, is it getting better or worse? Are the ways in which people perceive themselves in being more oppressed, like it's an unforgiving world, politics, it's there, or does that come up in do they feel this way? Do they feel that they're walking at, there's no mistake. If you make a mistake, you will be abandoned trust, and you will be exposed probably more than if you made just a regular mistake in other jobs that are less transparent. Did that come up in the?
Yeah, some things like that did come up. Like, for example, Lisa Raitt talked about how challenging it was when she went through the isotopes. I don't know what you would call it. Situation, and she really felt like the media did not treat her fairly. And then Selena Caesar-Chauvin talked about facing a lot of online toxicity, which is, I don't know, there's like a 10-year span there or more. So it's a kind of two different stories of like, how were you treated in the press, and then how were you treated by people with Twitter accounts. And they both felt targeted, and they were. But are things getting worse? I think definitely many of the MPs were talking about a loss of trust in general in institutions. And I think that what can happen when we hear people talking and telling their stories and being given the time to talk is that you can hopefully stitch together some of that trust again, because when you spend time with someone else, it's like, you know, you see people saying things on social media that you know they cannot say to other people's faces, right? There's just kind of a human code of conduct, right? That somehow goes out the window when you're just like this. And I think that we all experience that to some extent, and we have to push back on it. And I think that if you're talking about digital types of media, and digital tools in general, podcasting is a really great way. And I love, Kim, that you talk about radio, because it is basically the same thing, right? It's
I'm
just a
old-fashioned.
yes, but it's the same, it's the voice, you know?
It's the voice,
Yeah, and I think that using a voice, even though it's digital and you download it onto your phone, you know, it's a really great way to kind of try and get back from the edge of all of that kind of dehumanizing toxicity.
So after doing this series, would you run? Would you run for politics? And I'm serious. I mean, part of it is, does that make you want to be part of that world? Or do you continue to say it's not for everyone? What about you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it would be an honor. It'd be an honor to serve your community for sure. But it's hard to know what we know now and what was shared in these conversations. And I think I would want to see their recommendations responded to in a meaningful way. And, you know, we also talked with our guests about what it was like to be a woman in politics, what is it like to be from a community that's underrepresented, what's it like to be the only one that's like you. Selena Caesar-Chauvin reflected on that a lot. And you know, she also advises to run in packs, and you know that where she says that in our episode, that's really powerful, and it really is inspiring. And so, I think we should all be thinking about that as something we should all be willing to do, thinking about doing. But are the conditions of work going to be the right ones? And what can we do to make those better, so that the people we want in these spaces will go and stay?
Did you, what about you, Hannah?
Oh no.
Okay.
I thought we were going to move on.
No.
Oh, I mean, honestly, okay.
We had former journalists on the show.
Yes, we did, yeah.
Adam
Okay,
Bond.
can I just tell you, Natalie, that I have so much more respect for anybody who enters the world of politics now, because I already had a healthy level, but the truth is that the amount of work and what is expected is so huge. Their workplace is everywhere. It is everything, especially in the era of social media and people feeling like they can connect with you at any time and in any way. My personal answer is no. But listen, I will say that I was inspired by something that Cheryl Hardcastle told us about how she first, she's a former journalist as well, how she first felt she had a political spark, which is that she started to organize on behalf of her family, her children. Her children were in a hockey league, girls hockey, and they were not getting fair ice time.
Yeah.
And so she started to agitate from that level. And it really made me see that we can do things in our communities. Anything that we are passionate about, that is politics. So if you feel that you want to be an MP or an MPP or a city councillor, great, you know, go for it. But also there are many ways we can be political and benefit our own communities. And the more that we all do that, the better off we all are.
What about you, Kim?
As a journalist, no. My job was to sort of hold politicians to account, and I think that's an important thing, and it didn't matter the stripe. It was really important that we hold people to account. That's what we do. But I do believe in public service, and I think, you know, and what politicians do is a public service. We've all not been, I think, mindful enough of our roles and how we influence one another. So politicians have not been really, you know, the message track has certainly created divides with journalists. I mean, and so you get that adversarial. So I think that we all have our roles in the community, in politics, and at the university, at the college here. in being public servants, and all of us in the audience and watching online as well have that important role.
Because the point that you discuss is it's humans of the house,
Yeah.
but it is stories about civic engagement. You know,
Yeah.
it is stories about people who decide to do something to help their community. Are you going to do another series then outside of politics, like the other forms of civic engagement that would be fun?
That
you know,
would be
trying
fun.
to the people that try to influence politicians that are really engaged in their communities. So, anyone else who has a question for our audience?
Hi, I don't have a fully formed question, but I'll offer something. I'm curious, I mean, you had hours and hours of recording. Obviously, there ended up being something on the, cutting room floor. Is there anything that you left out that like maybe didn't fit, but is something that you would like to share with us? Or is there anything that surprised you? You set this up, you sort of like have some expectation, what sort of surprised you? And I guess another thing to inquire is, I know I'm a very partisan person. Like if there is something very, like if you have sort of a partisan leaning, was there somebody that you interviewed from a different party or a different side that you connected with that you were surprised by, or something of that nature? Any of those questions, you can answer them however you like.
Yeah, anything that surprised you? That is not in the, well, let's start there. Anything that was a surprise?
Every time Sabreena and I did a recording, I think whenever we said, okay, thank you very much, goodbye, click, we both would just look at each other like, wow, for a while. And we would sit there, and every time, right? Because I think the biggest surprise overall was how open and forthcoming people were. Were there specific surprises? Gosh, putting me on the spot. What do you think?
I didn't think that the conversations would get as deep and emotional as they did, right? And we also took our time with the conversations, and we were doing all these interviews by Zoom, which was different this time around. We weren't going to people and interviewing them in person. And maybe it was just the stage in the pandemic and beaming into people's homes, and they were used to using Zoom, and they just were ready, I guess. But in terms of choices that we made and what got left out, the way that we grouped the episodes is where they're at in their journey as an MP. So it wasn't so much about they all had different things to say, like they all kind of followed that same kind of arc, I guess. And so there wasn't any kind of outlier material. And I'm a sociologist by training. The Samara Centre is a nonpartisan research organization. So doing these interviews with that lens was fine for us as well. And nobody came to the conversation with like party talking points. They just were really real. And so then we could just follow their lead on that.
So would you vote for all of them? No, it's interesting. It's, now that you got to know them better, the question about partisanship, because some people say that they transcend their party in a way. They get to be expert at representing their riding, and their party allyship is not as strong, or it's not as, some people have different levels of partisanship, I would say. Did you find that in your people?
Well, it was interesting because you may get a chance to vote for a former MP again, because they often move into municipal politics. So we interviewed Kennedy Stewart when he was the mayor of Vancouver for the show. So it's not out of the question, and it was really nice to have a lot of one-on-one time with them and get to know them. And as Hannah has noted, our respect and appreciation for the work and the fact that there are good, hardworking people in these roles. They take public service so seriously. Nobody regrets their time in these jobs at all, and these are 12 very different people, is really powerful and important. And Yeah, I don't know. And I was kind of skeptical that we wouldn't hear what we wouldn't get much authenticity because maybe they're thinking of running again.
Yeah.
And that's always in the air. But nevertheless, I think we just heard from them as human beings. But I don't know, maybe, I guess. You know, there's a wide range of people.
I think anybody who votes for any one of them, if we were to travel back in time, because most of them are not, like, you can feel confident voting. If you agree with their platform, you can feel confident for voting for any one of them, because I felt like regardless of your political stripe, and our last question asker said that they're partisan, like, thank you, you're being honest, you know, and but if you agree with what they're saying, I really felt the sincerity of their effort, you know? So even if you don't agree with how to do things, they definitely were all going for this role with a real genuine kind of, desire.
There actually is currently an opportunity to vote for a guest because Selena Caesar-Chavannes is running in the Toronto by-election.
Oh, yeah. So here we are. Well, I think what do you want? I mean, we're coming to the end of our dialogue here. I think particular things that you want people to get out of this dialogue, beside listen to the 6 episodes of the series, you know, anything else that you want the audience to reflect on?
I think that what we tried to do with the show was make a show about human beings who happen to have jobs in politics. And so you don't have to identify as a political junkie to be interested in the show. We worked really hard to make it as accessible and engaging to anybody who's looking for a gateway into conversations about politics or just learning some Canadian stories.
Yes.
There's a lot of different angles and ways to get into it.
And I'd say that I agree with Kim's assessment that every student in Canada should listen, but also it's not just for students, because there's so much that I learned in making it, you know, and it was really a wonderful opportunity to learn these things from the people who were really taking their public service seriously, and you know, after the fact they can reflect, and I enjoy any opportunity to hear people reflecting on a very intense experience, right? And they were really doing it with constructive criticism in mind, so I do recommend that everybody listen to it.
Yes. We're all students of life.
Yes.
And it was rich. It was so rich and surprising. I mean, it was surprising the intimacy that we tend to think that politicians are such plastic figures. And it was really, really wonderful to see that. So thank you so much.
So it was wonderful to have you here, and to let's all go and take some time to listen to humans of the house, unguarded humans of the house, in a way, to get a better sense of political engagement. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, miigwech, to all of you.
Thanks. Thanks, Jen.